Hey, everybody, welcome to View from the Top podcast, where we help growth-minded men who want momentum and accountability in their business, in their family, and in their finances get through the valleys and up the mountains to their very own view from the top. So glad you listened in today. My name is Wally, and I've got Big A ready to shake some trees.
I don't know about shaking trees. I'm dealing with some really weird emotions today, though, quite honestly. Wally, you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I kind of went down memory lane yesterday for a few minutes. And one of the businesses I was in partners with had sold, and they said, hey, you got some old records and things, articles that belong to you personally. You need to run down and get them. So I did. I haven't been down there in years to this business. And so I went and got it. And I said, while I'm down here, I'm going to spend 30 minutes and kind of ride around, look at the area. I grew up in Madison, Tennessee, and that's where the business was located.
That's just north of Nashville, right?
It's just north of Nashville, about 10 miles north of Nashville. And man, the memories that just flooded my mind. It was just like I would remember happy times and then real sad times. There was a lot of bad things happened while I was in that business, and then a lot of good things. And I just drove through the neighborhoods, and I was like, man, that used to really look big and important, and now it's like dilapidated. What happened to it? But then I drove through.
Me.
I did.
Like,
I drove. I did. I drove through where I met Robin and sit there and had a little moment. I was by myself, and so I'm still working through kind of those emotions today. But things are good. Things are good. It was a good time in my life. It was a good business, and but man, I don't know. Do you ever do that? Do you ever kind of go back to places and reflect?
Yeah. So obviously, we just moved recently, even. And, we were in Michigan for 23 years, and then we moved down here last year. And then this past May, so it had been almost a year since we had moved, and went back to that area for a wedding. And I couldn't help but drive by the old place, and for us, when we bought that place, we bought it as ground with, it was woods. And so we cut every tree and, it pulled every stump. I mean, people helped us, obviously. We had excavators and stuff, but, we built a house and we're there for, man, I don't know, since 2004. So it was quite a while, 18 years or so, 19 years. So it was a long time. So we drove by thinking, right, I was a little unsure, and you kind of drive by, and it was really cool. There's a lot of memories there, but the cool thing, I think God's given us the ability to remember things. Visual helps, but I had no attachment, which I thought that would be different. Like when you think about when you were back driving through and thinking of those memories, having those memories come back and feeling those emotions, and was there anything that you were like, you really, really missed when you know what I'm saying? Or was your life, you know what I'm asking?
Yeah. No, I hadn't thought about it in light of things that I missed. I will have to say, though, honestly, those were good times. Like I just started this new partnership. I had been in Madison my whole life and met Robin there. And I missed the simplicity of things. I read a post a couple of days ago. A guy said, I wish that we still popped popcorn in a skillet and had three stations on TV, and at night the TV went off, and so there's a simplicity of things that I miss a little bit. Things seem a little more hectic and chaotic than they used to be, and that's really the reason that kind of wanted to talk about chaos a little bit now. I'm glad you brought that up. It's a great kind of segue into some of the things that we want to talk about. There's a lot of guys out there today that are really living in chaos. And we deal with them each and every day. I have coaching clients and guys in the mastermind, and they're trying to find their way. Wally, let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt a sense of chaos in the business that you were in prior to you and I getting together doing this View from the Top?
Oh man, it's been a minute, but for sure I can think back and remember. I think it was about 2010. So I'd had the company for about 5 years. I think we had grown to about 10 employees. I was making a living wage. Like I was being able to pay the bills and stuff, but I was getting going still, even after 5 years. And I just remember getting up early and staying up really late
Mm.
and working a lot.
That sounds like an entrepreneur's life.
Well, yeah, and I think there's seasons of that, but I think I got to a point I know I got to a point in 2010 where I was like, okay, something had to change.
Mm,
Like that wasn't sustainable,
mm,
right? I think there's moments that we find ourselves feeling like we're in chaotic situations.
mhm.
Um, but
You had little kids at
I
that
did,
time
yeah,
too, didn't you?
yeah, for sure. The girls were
It was
little,
like, how was that affecting them?
yeah. Um, I
Dad
would
was present,
flex.
but he
Part of the
wasn't really.
chaos, part of the chaos was, the benefit. Okay, so back off a second. Business owners that are listening to this, that we know, I always found it interesting when I had when you're running a business, that you've got people that look at you. Often they can look at you and think, oh, maybe they're a little jealous. Let me give you an example.
Mm,
Was actually talking with somebody the other day about, what was it like when you were younger? Her dad owned a business. Some family friends were over. Her dad owned a business. We were just talking about like what it was like when you were younger. And she made a comment. She said, "Yeah, like my dad was pretty much there for everything. Sports things, school things. Um, but then there were times when he'd do that, but then he'd have to go back to work, and that was my experience. So I would flex my schedule. Like I had the privilege, the opportunity to flex my schedule, but because I could flex my schedule, I think it made things a little more chaotic inside of our family. Um, Sonia had to do more. So there's pros and cons to that. But I think as business owners, a lot of times we find ourselves, because we're able to make some choices that maybe other people are not able to make because of the situations for the employment they find themselves in. And sometimes the chaos is just strictly that we're in this season where we just have to work our tails off for a while.
mm,
And
mm.
then, other seasons where we're not. But I think the challenge is, it's not that things don't get chaotic for a little bit. It's that, do we find ourselves staying in it too long?
Let me ask you a question related to flexing your schedule. You probably never had this problem. I hope Robin doesn't listen to this episode. But did you ever find yourself where maybe Sonya would say, "Hey, go take the girls here, go do this, or go pick up this"? And you're like, "I'm in the middle of work."
Absolutely. Dude, it still happens sometimes.
And I'm going to tell you something. It
I've been
was
married
like,
30 years, and
I
it still
know.
happens sometimes.
I know Robin would come out to my office and she goes, "Well, like you own the place, like you do whatever you want." And I said, "Well, yeah, but what I need to do is exactly what I'm doing." And we would get into this tussle, it's like, "Can't you take Brooke here? Can't you take Holly here? Or can you not take off half a day and let's go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I could, but that's really going to make my life miserable tomorrow, right?" It's
Tomorrow.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like that's part of the chaos. It's like, yeah, it's a good thing, and if something comes up, yeah, I'm happy to do it. And Robin, honey, I love you if you listen to this episode, but the truth is, guys are dealing with that. Women are dealing with that have flex schedules, right? That work from
Mhm.
home, and yeah, we got to be mindful of that. We got to build boundaries, and it's taken me years to build some boundaries around that to where Robin goes, "Yeah, I get it. I see now. She understands more right now
Yeah. Sonya
than
does
she
too.
did early." And so, yeah, it creates some chaos, though, no question about it. I was in chaos recently, and you're very familiar with this because several years ago, we created the Mastermind Playbook, and we had people reaching out from all over the world wanting us to train them and teach them how to build masterminds. And so it took us about 18 months to put together a playbook that teaches people how to do what we've been able to do very successfully in building Iron Sharpens Iron Mastermind. But it was taking more time than probably I should have allowed it. And then we had one-on-one coaching. We had the mastermind, 16 mastermind groups to try to manage, and we had a small team. And you came on board, about 3 years ago to be the integrator, and you said, "Hey, we've got to push pause here on something. Like, there's no way that you've got the bandwidth I mean, you're in total chaos, no question about it. And we're going to have to reorient our focus. We're going to have to decide what is priority. What is the thing that you are doing? Because multitasking is a madness, and it's just not functional to be successful at the level that we wanted to. And so we had to make some really tough choices around that. And you were very instrumental in helping us figure that out.
Yeah, I just think the idea of when you find yourself in chaos, I think one of the factors is often that we try to do too many things at once, right? And that's the idea you're talking about with multitasking. I think that's a factor for sure that we need to be paying attention to. That we need to. What is it? Steve Jobs, I think, when he came back to Apple, so he started Apple, board took over, he got let go, he comes back to Apple. I don't remember what it was, how many products they had. They had a ton, and I mean, like a
He
lot.
slashed them. Yeah, he slashed them.
Yeah, he brought it back to like single digits or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Handful.
those things are hard to do, especially in small businesses where you have a customer because you've created this chaos for yourself in some ways because you've built relationships because of one product and one variation that serves this customer and this customer and this customer and this customer. And so, I mean, essentially what you do is you created the chaos, you're trying to do too many things at once, and then you start getting overwhelmed and burnout.
Well, I think it's important to point out that he slashes their product list down to single digits. And it's funny you mentioned them. I didn't know you were going to mention them. I looked them up yesterday. They just crossed the $3 trillion market cap. Only company ever to cross $3 trillion in single digit. Now they've got more products,
Yeah,
now.
they've grown out
Right,
since
right.
then.
But
But the
what I'm
point
saying
is they
is
were,
his
yeah.
focus. He
Mhm.
focused, and now he's become the most valuable company in the world.
Yeah. So I think we make things chaotic for ourselves by trying to do too many things at once.
So what do we
Um,
do as a result of that? Like, how do you prioritize? And we do a pretty good job of that with our quarterly meetings here at View from the Top, where we call them big rocks, and we kind of prioritize. Walk us through that just a little bit.
yeah. So if anybody's familiar with done like whether it's EOS, 12-week year, business on purpose, any of those systems or frameworks that are out that exist out there, they have this idea of a 90-day cycle, and so a quarter cycle essentially. And historically, I think what people did when in the past we were taught to create like annual goals. And what would happen? That sounds great, right? It's important to have annual goals. What do we want to accomplish this year?
Sure.
And it sounds great, and we need them. But the problem is that we didn't reverse engineer that back to say, okay, well, what do we need to do each quarter? And then even further back to say, we're going to talk another episode here coming up. I think it's next week's episode. We're going to really dive into priorities. And yet there actually isn't a word called priorities. I'll just seed that. We have to determine what is a priority, and it's really important for us to look at everything we're doing, the goals we have for the year, and then to take that first quarter of the year and say, okay, what's going to move the needle? And what's most important? When we have other things we have to do, there's daily activities, there's things like that have to get done. But I think some of that chaos in goal planning happens because we don't do quarterly planning, we do annual planning. And we get to the last half of the year. Actually, we get to that first quarter, and just mentally we think we've got the rest of the year to get it done, and then halfway through the year comes and we still got half of the year, and the busyness of the business and customers and feature asks and all that stuff kind of, not that it gets in the way, but it we haven't been intentional about guiding ourselves, so we let that guide us, and that just creates all kinds of chaos in our minds.
Wally, I want you to talk to the visionary just for a minute. And I just want to warn you before you do this, don't you throw me under the bus, okay? So, but I can get out of the shower and have 3 new things I want to do, in our quarterly meeting. And you've even started a list. You said, okay, we're going to put it on
It's
the
like 12
list.
pages long.
I know Don't throw me under the bus, Wally.
I did.
But
It's just a lot of ideas.
these visionaries have a lot of ideas.
Yeah,
So
they should.
talk to that guy for a minute. What do you say to him, and what do you say to the guy that serves in your role, the integrator? Because prioritization is difficult for visionaries, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it all seems important. You're like, what do you want to do? Yes, I want to do all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, no, we can't do all of it. And we would almost get in a fist fight. It'd be like, I want to do this and I want to do this. So talk to that guy just for a second.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that as a visionary, and whether you're if you're listening to this and you have a second in command, they're not a COO, they're an integrator, they're director of operations, they're a business manager, like whatever they are, they're kind of playing that they should be playing some type of role by taking what the visionary says and has ideas and then implementing them. That's how that works. And so what happens though, the visionary, like you said, has just a million ideas.
Sure.
And some of them are really, really good. So from a visionary's perspective, it's not chaotic. You shouldn't necessarily feel like it's chaotic that you have all these ideas. The reason it feels chaotic is you have the ideas and you don't know what the heck happens to them after you have the ideas. Mm-hmm. That's why it feels chaotic. Mm-hmm. Because you have mentioned 20 things, and in your mind, like subconsciously even, I think it's like, oh, those things are going to get done. And then you move on. You got more ideas. Mm-hmm. And then a quarter goes down the road and you're in a meeting and you're like, wait a second, what? We said we were doing this, this, and this. And your business manager, your COO, if your integrator, if they have not been trained or given permission to be able to decipher all the ideas that visionary has, if they can't do that and they haven't been given permission, it creates absolute chaos in the operational team because they think that everything you say they have to do. And they take it seriously because they care. And so they're trying, but kind of back to multitasking. You can't do anything. Right. You can't do everything really well. You just can't.
Amount of bandwidth.
You've got to communicate. If you want that chaos to stop, of just the insanity of that, you've got to communicate both the visionary and that business manager, COO, integrator, director of operations, whatever role they're in. They really need to communicate on a weekly basis so that you have a space to be able to, as a visionary, you have a space to be able to get all your ideas out and they can capture all those ideas. And then part of their job is not to do them all. Actually, that's part of their job is like absolutely not to do them all. But really what they're looking for is trends and they're looking for consistency in your ideas. And so they'll see where 2 or 3 ideas will link together over a period of a couple of months that you have. And then they're able to come back and say, okay, what if we did this, 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 and this, or tied these things together? And all of a sudden you've got something that, you can latch onto. You come to the quarterly meeting, talk about it as a big rock. Does it make sense for the business? We use kind of we're not good at it every single time, but we have kind of a litmus test. There's questions that we put together. There's 10 questions that we ask ourselves. I kind of memorize most of them in my head for the most part. Like, do they align with a vision? Right? Is it a one-time off thing? That's a really dangerous one. Is it a one-time off thing, or is it something that's repeatable we can sell to other customers? Right? Is it a fad or is it a trend? There's lots of fads that come into our marketplaces, but being the first one, pioneers tend to get arrows in their backs. So being that first one isn't necessarily the best. Now, getting the right product to the marketplace as the solid product, like you can fall into a trend that way and still do a really good job with it without necessarily always having to be first. There are places where first is good. I'm not saying that every time, but we have these rules that we kind of follow to keep us in line with our ideas and just make sure that they're lining up with our overall strategy as a business. But just having that framework and kind of those guides and those rules and that communication consistently, it really helps to remove a lot of the chaos in the business. I mean, just ask yourself, do you feel today less chaotic than you did 3 years ago?
Oh, yeah, way more so.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty cool. You even said this after about a year. You said, I've paid attention, and you mentioned that one thing one time. You haven't said anything else about it. But this thing you're talking about, this is the fifth time you've mentioned it. I
Hmm.
know it's really important to you. And so I thought it was admirable that you were paying attention to that level, that you heard me repeat that numbers of times. And it's like, no, this is something I need to pay attention to. It's really important to you. Okay. So after we make that priority and we've identified that it's going to be the most valuable thing that we do next, like what is the next right step? Like how else can we solve for not being chaotic? What is an actual task that we can do to help us get out of chaos? What are some of the things that you do?
Yeah, I want to go back real quick though before we just move on, because I think I know what we're going to talk about next. That lines up with what you're asking me, but I think there's a space, and I mentioned the word overwhelm and burnout, and that happens a lot. And so, kind of going back before I said what I just said, in that process of not having that communication, whether it's just you as a solopreneur, not having someone to be able to help guide you and just kind of, forging
Right.
on your own, um, that's going to create chaos for yourself. And that chaos is going to turn in very likely trying to overwhelm and burnout.
Mm,
And the last thing you want, one of the last things you want to do, there's something about overwhelm and burnout for yourself. And it's a very dangerous place to be. A lot of people get in real trouble when they get there, not just physically with their bodies and such, but relationships really suffer. You can get, mental fatigue, and that can create
yeah.
all kinds of emotional, wellness issues. And so
Mm,
you don't want to get there yourself. Man, the last thing you want to do is take people along with you, and
mm,
so protecting your team against that overwhelm um, and burnout is really helpful when you kind of follow those strategies that we just talked about of communication, writing it down, setting quarterly goals on top of your annual goals, things
mhm,
like that.
mhm.
How do we help? How can we help when we figured out that, okay, here's the things we want to do? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I was just saying after we've determined what's priority, I
Hmm.
know there's some specific things that you've done well and you've taught me to do actually. One of them is time blocking. One of
Yeah.
them is that you like take your calendar and specifically say on this date I'm going to work on this project. And I wasn't really good at that. Like I was years ago, I would put out the fires, right? Instead of allocating the time to work on these projects specifically. So just I really admire how you do time blocking, and I just wanted you to talk on that for a moment.
Yeah. I mean, we read a book a couple of years ago now, well, a number of years ago now. I think it was, man, must have been back like maybe 16 or 17, somewhere in there. But it was called Deep Work by Cal Newport.
Mm,
And he talks a lot about using the calendar, using your time wisely in blocks, and how important it is to take, a 3 to 4 hour block to work on something. And today we find ourselves, with our phones and our emails and all the notifications that are going off a million different places. Depending on your working environment, if you're working from home, you have, I don't mean family's a distraction, but if there's people in your house and they're getting your attention, and you're supposed to be doing something else, it's a distraction. That's what it is. And so you have to see that for what it is, recognize all those things, and then find a place in your schedule where you can really do deep work. And that's usually a 3 to 4 hour block where you set aside something specific, turn your notifications off on your phone. I don't know if all these things coming at us that create the chaos, like all the notifications and the text and the um, if if we're listening to all those every day, all day long, like you've really, your life is going to drastically change. We think we have to like answer immediately, and we
mhm,
really, there's some things we do, but most things we don't.
mhm,
We need to answer appropriately, but all these notifications, all these things that we have turned on, that's just getting up in our face all the time. I think that we really need to take into consideration and turn a lot of that stuff off, especially while we're doing deep work. and just remove that chaos from your mindset. I think that's a really good place to start.
I want to touch on that just for a second. Kind of overlaps into we're going kind of back and forth a little bit with the chaos and the overwhelm and the burnout, but it
Mm-hmm.
all integrates, right?
Yeah, it
It
does.
all. And so 18 months ago, I know I've mentioned this in previous episodes. I hit the wall pretty hard
Mhm.
because I was burnt out and there was just so much going on in my personal life and in my business life. I was making some big decisions. I told somebody the other day, I've never been 62, right? So I've never made decisions for a 62-year-old guy before. It looks different than when I was
Yeah.
25. And so it just takes a different level of processing. And so I came to you and I said, hey, I'm taking some time off. And I took November and December off a year and a half ago. And I reflected back on that book, Deep Work by
Mm.
Cal, and it allowed me to go deeper because I didn't have the distractions. And I unplugged from social media, turned my phone off. I've got two phones. One of my phones, only three people have the phone number, Robin, Brooke, and Holly. And outside of that, I'm like, hey, they're going to have to wait. And so unplug from social media, emails, telephone, everything. Man, I came back refreshed. I came back with new ideas. I was able to think at a different level. So listen to what Wally is telling you here on the deep work and turning off the notifications. I know that the notifications are a distraction. It disallows you from doing your best work. So if you're going to do some time blocking, just try it. This week, just go say, I listened to Big A and Wally, and they said for me to unplug. I'm going to do that for like half a day, just half a day. Cut the notifications off to see how much more you get done.
Yeah. Chaos rarely happens in isolation. It's usually all of those. There's a lot of things, right, that create the chaos.
Right, right.
And so just start identifying and eliminating some of those little things, um, to get rid of chaos. And then there's things
Mhm,
I think we can add. I know
mhm,
that sounds weird to say, like, oh, man, if things are chaotic, why would I add?
mm,
Well, I think things like if things are chaotic for you, then more than likely, uh, you're probably doing things that maybe someone else could help you do.
mm.
Like a lot of
Right.
times as business owners, we can take on that mindset of, oh, I've been doing this. I've been doing this. You did an exercise once that you learned through Business on Purpose program, where you went through and you wrote down literally like every like 15-minute blocks, I think, everything you
Yeah.
did for like 2
Yeah.
weeks or something.
Right. Right.
And isn't it eye opening
Oh my
when you
gosh.
look
Scott
back and be
Beebe.
like, why
Yeah.
am I
Scott
doing
Beebe
that?
introduced me to that, my business on purpose. And he said, Big A, the things, write down everything you do and then go back and grade them. What gives you energy? What drains you? And I did that exercise and it was very eye opening. Uh, here's the thing, we kind of revert back to this a lot. We talk about this next comment a lot. But one of the things that you've got to do is you've got to be honest with yourself about what it is that you want. And that is so hard for people to answer. They're like, man, I'm just not sure what I want. Well, you're going to continue to have chaos in your life if you can't identify what it is that you want. And I know it's difficult and I know it can change periodically and there's different seasons of life. And the things that I wanted when I was 20 and 30 and 40 are much different than at my age now. And I know you can probably share the same, that your
Sure.
focus was different, your responsibilities were different. And so I think that's a moving thing, right? What do I want today may not be what I want in 5 years from now. But if you can't specifically answer that for a short period of time, for the next 12 to 18 months, what is it that you want? You're going to continue to have chaos. And I would encourage you to go to our site, View from the Top, and there's a document there called What Do I Want? And we reference it pretty often. It's one of the most downloaded tools that we have to work through what it is that you want. Do it with your spouse. Some people would do it with their kids. Some people take and use it on date night. They'll take it out and say, hey, we've never really talked about this jointly. What is it that we want? What do we want our life to look like so that we can probably eliminate some of this chaos in our life? So, yeah, go check that out at View from the Top.
Yeah. If you go to viewfromthetop.com/resources, or just go to viewfromthetop.com and look at the resources tab in the navigation, you'll be able to find that. pretty
Wally,
pretty
one of
awesome.
the things that you've really helped me on as well, being the integrator at View from the Top, is delegating. And I was fearful of delegating because I was like, nobody's going to do it like I'll do it, right? And it was like, I own it. This is mine. I'm gonna, I gave birth to it. Nobody can take care of it like me. How did you first work through? Because you had a pretty sizable team, the last company that you had. Um, how did you get comfortable with delegating?
Yeah, I actually think that goes back to the beginning story that I was telling about, kind of getting to that point in 2010 where you're just doing so much and things are chaotic. And for me, I was, working all the time and having some success. It wasn't that, things were bad, but I just knew it wasn't sustainable. And so about that time, I started looking for resources and books and conferences. And, this was kind of before masterminds or peer advisory groups were really a thing. There were probably some out there, but they didn't advertise well or anything, so I didn't know about them. And it was about that time I started looking for stuff like that and started figuring out that, oh man, I got to actually build teams out and build leadership on those teams. If I, want to have some sanity for myself, now and looking down the road, like there's no, you ever get to that? Have you gotten to that point before where you're like, okay, enough's enough?
Yeah, I do reach that. And I always know when I'm ready to make a change when I'm willing to suffer the consequences.
That's good.
And so for me, sometimes it takes being pushed, other times it's elective. But when you're willing to suffer the consequences, you've got to make a change. And I
Yeah.
remember the stories you telling about, you'd eat with the girls and Sonia, and then you go back to work after they went to bed and work till 2 o'clock in the
Yeah.
morning.
It's crazy.
And it was that not exhausting?
Yeah, it was. It was terrible.
I
It was
mean,
terrible.
I mean, it
I mean,
can't
at
be
the
good for
time,
your
in the
relationship.
beginning, it was exciting, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It was funny too because there's like this. I remember more so then than now, probably, but there was definitely back in the 2000, the early 2000s. There was this almost a badge of honor, right? To be able to say, I was up working till 2 a.m. this morning.
Mm.
Now I look at that and go, man, like,
He needs
okay,
to
how
learn to
long are you going to do
delegate.
that for? Because I can't even do it anymore. But
Right.
how, and if I had, there's so many things. We don't have time on this episode today, man. But there are so many things um, that I could have done differently, and with knowing now what I know now, and um, it's going back. I would do it very differently, and it's fun to be able to be in masterminds now, to be in peer advisory groups, and to be able to have those conversations and try to encourage these other guys that are coming along, that are find themselves in that spot right now, where they're just like things are going okay, but they're just on that hamster wheel,
Mm.
and they've got to figure out how to step off, and comes in the end of the day, there's some form of delegation that takes place, and you don't know what you don't know, and you're just so fearful of,
Mm.
oh man, there's maybe an expense with, because delegation means more people, and yeah,
Sure.
there's people means emotion, and people means drama sometimes, and people means expense, and so yeah, there's all of that. um, but you don't know what it feels like. It was like having that first child. I
Right,
know it's
right.
a crazy example, but it's like you don't know what it's like being a parent until
Not you
you
have
become a
a kid.
parent.
Right.
You
Here's
don't
what
know
I
what
have
it's like to
found.
delegate that first time
I
until
know.
you do it successfully and you're like, "Oh my gosh."
Here's what I found out most of the time. They do it better than I
Yeah,
did.
right. If you get the
That's
right
what's
person in the right spot,
hilarious,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
they're operating in their zone of genius.
yeah.
And I was operating in a zone of competence. I could figure it out.
Or
It didn't give
frustration,
me
you just didn't wanna
energy.
let it go.
I know. It was like, and so, one of the things that you and I've talked about a lot is that when you're starting your first business, your nose to the grindstone, you're just trying to make money. And you never really took time, nor did I, for personal growth. It was all about making the money, building the company. How has that changed for you over the past, say, 10 years? And what is the value of really paying attention to your personal growth?
I will say that I've struggled uh, over my whole life with. I'll have swings of like, okay, I'm in it, and whether it's physical activity, whether it's my fuel, the food that I intake, the food that I eat, the types of food, the amounts of food, whether it's my spiritual time, that I'm growing my relationship with God, whether it's some books that I'm reading. Um, I do think, looking back, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot, and I know you have too. Like we've taken the opportunity. I don't say we've had it. We've made the opportunity to do that. I don't I think it's a dangerous place to be because I've been there a couple times in my life where I really come down on myself because I'm not doing all the things all the time. I'm not in my Bible every morning for an hour. I'm not out hitting the gym or hitting the pavement running or doing exercises every day, every morning before I get started. I'm not on my fifth book of the fifth month, because that's the book club thing that I'm in, or you could go on and on with it. And I think the overwhelm of that, right, the chaos that mentally that creates, thinking that we have to do all those things, actually ends up can paralyze us. And so, what I have found that has worked for me is to bite off a chunk at a time. And then you build muscle, right? You build that muscle memory, you build habits, you layer them on top of each other. And then, back then, when I was in that stage of like 2005 to 2012 of, up late and all that, I was in the worst health that I was in ever. I weighed the most that I ever have. Um, I was the unhealthiest person that I've ever been in that time of my life. Um, and I praise God that it's not that way today, and that
Mm.
He taught me so much through Sonia, through you know uh, other people in my life, and then you come along and you find um, people that you put alongside of you as that you trust, you want to show up for, and they want to show up for you.
I think the final thing that we need to mention before we end today is we need to do very strategic planning. And I think that's where a lot of businessmen that are listening to us today are just head down. They've got responsibilities, obligations, and they're just cranking it out. And they look up one day and they're not even sure where they're at. And they're not even sure if the activity that they're doing is helping them accomplish the vision and the goal that they established early in their career because they've not managed it well. They've not had accountability. They've not had trusted advisors. They're just all about in the grind. Give me bigger, better, shinier, faster. Just give me more. And then we look up one day and we're like, man, we've got a mess, right? We've made a little bit of money. I remember coming home with a pocket full of it to a house full of strangers decades ago.
Mm.
And Robin said, thank you for all these things, but I feel like a single parent, and it rocked my world. It was like, man, this is not at all what I had intended. But I was so busy, caught up in the chaos. I was in the minutia every single day, not coming up for air. And I want to encourage the listeners today to come up for air. I want to encourage you today to really think about your vision, to really think about what it is that's important and what relational cost is it for the level of financial success that you're achieving. We look at it kind of like a three-legged stool, right? There's personal, professional, and spiritual. And if any of those things are out of balance at any time, your stool's going to wobble, right? And we want you to be whole in your entirety. So I want you to think through, what is my strategic plan? how is it that I'm growing personally? Who are the people around me in my life that's holding me accountable to grow personally? Uh, could I delegate some things? Could I really look over the process by which I'm growing my business and delegate things that are draining me, that are sucking the energy out of me? And hopefully and prayerfully, Wally, they won't get to that overwhelm and that burnout stage where they can really focus in and grow and have that level of success and significance that we talk about ongoing. And then finally, I just want to say that we've got to prioritize. A lot of people tell me all the time, my family's the most important thing, but they're spending 30 minutes a day with them and they're at the office 12 hours a day. And I just want to tell you that your words are falling on deaf ears. We do what's important, and you've got to show your family through actions, not through words, what's really important. Listen, Wally, I don't know if you've got anything to add today, but thank you for sharing all the stories that you've shared. Thank you for walking this journey with us as we talk about Chaotic Kevin. We're going to name the episode after you today, Chaotic Kevin,
There we go.
and some of the experiences that you've had.
Yeah. I I do want to go back. I think this is important as we finish up this episode. I don't want to give the impression that uh, even thinking back, some of those moments of chaos created moments of opportunity. But they created a lot more stress, a lot more uh, fractured relationships, a lot less sleep, a lot less. They gave me a lot less than they actually gave me on the upside. At the same time, like, I think someone who's going through a moment of chaos right now or looking ahead and saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to hit this season," just make sure it's a season, right? Don't get caught up in it being a series. Like, make it the shortest season you possibly
Right,
can,
right.
and let's not have it go on for too long. I just think that's really important. That as business owners, we're going to find ourselves in the crunch sometimes, and that's okay. Let's just not be there too long. Let's use
Let's
those tools.
don't be chaotic long, right? Single focus, delegate where you can, don't be overwhelmed and burn out. Plan strategically, and you too can have that life of success and significance that you're striving for.